Hi, this is János, it's Real World Audio, and I received a question, a really exciting question on my latest old video. And Pierre asked, does bass reflex use the room? And he asked that, you would think of course it does the room, but in this video to which he responded, I'm talking about high efficiency and ultra efficiency speakers as well, and the way they can become ultra efficient in the bass reproduction is by using the room as the extension of themselves. So the only way that you can reach high efficiency in a bass department, or no, not the only way, but I would say the only a very practical way for very high efficiency speakers is to use the room, and that really merits the question. But what about the bass reflex design? What's going on? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you two examples, so and show you what a Voigt pipe or transmission lines, both of them do the same thing. Voigt pipe is a transmission line, so I will show a Voigt pipe, but what I'm showing applies to all transmission lines basically. So we'll show what they do to create the bass response, and afterwards I will show what happens with the bass reflex cabinet. How is that different? Is there any difference between them? Okay, if you don't want to wait for it, I can tell it's a night and day difference. It's totally different how they produce bass regarding the room. So now let's have a look at it. I'm just adjusting the magic, and I'm adjusting it on my screen as well. Awesome! And so what we are having here is, this is the representation of a Voigt pipe looking at it from the side. So if you take off the side panel from the Voigt pipe, the blue lines, that's kind of what you will see. You will see like a triangular shape with a bottom, and then the gaping hole on the front, that's the mouth of the pipe, and I'm calling it mouth because it behaves much more like a horn mouth. And I'm not calling it as a port because it behaves nothing like a bass reflex port. So that's why when I'm using terminology, I'm sticking to calling it the mouth of the pipe and not the port. But usually people call it port as well because it looks like a port. It doesn't do anything like a port, so that's why I don't want to confuse people. But sometimes I also call it a port because it looks like a port. What are you looking at? If I say, look at the mouth, huh? What? It's not a person, doesn't have a head, where is the mouth? So that's why sometimes you can do that, call it a port, but when really want to go down to the nitty-gritty, I really want to insist on calling it the mouth of the pipe because it behaves like more like a horn mouth and nothing like a port of the loudspeaker. But I would say even like a mouth of a horn, it's a little different. That there's another thing going on there. So it doesn't really behave like a horn mouth, but it behaves much more similar to a horn mouth. So it's kind of like we are on the same continent. If you're looking at countries, we are on the same continent, and for port, that's on a very different continent on what they do. So without further ado, what you see on the inside is the air column, the pressure changing up and down inside the air. So what happens is that we have the driver here. Maybe let's just draw it there. Looks like something like this. Maybe let's make it a different color so that you can see it. Okay, so let's imagine that that's our driver. And all this hubbub is because the driver, any driver that you have, you can make it super duper efficient, but only down to the frequencies that correspond to the physical size, the diameter of the driver. Because when you add the sound wave, let's try to add the squiggle here, maybe I can do it. like it's really thin, but I'm going to change the color soon, and you will be able to see what I was squiggling there. Let's add some weight to it. There it is. So when it creates a sound wave of this frequency that corresponds to the frequency of this sound wave, it is able to efficiently do that. For most speakers, it means down to the kilohertz range. If we go below the kilohertz range, because the sound wave starts to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, the size of the moving part is not enough to create that pressure fluctuation evenly. And even when you have a 15-inch diameter driver, even in that case, it is fully efficient down to about 2 kilohertz. Below 2 kilohertz, even a 15-inch driver starts to lose efficiency. So just think about that it's just really hard, really tough to ask a driver to do frequencies like 200 hertz or below. Even like a monster 16-inch driver or 20-inch driver will be so much more efficient at 1 kilohertz than at 200 hertz. So that's why we need to put them in a cabinet to hear those frequencies that are below this kilohertz or even higher. If you have an 8-inch driver, then maybe like 3 kilohertz or even higher. Below that, they start to drop in efficiency a lot already. So what happens is that we need to create a box. And what the box does is it uses the opposite pressure of the membrane. So when we have a driver here, as the driver moves forward and backward, half of the energy goes into the room directly from the surface of the cone, and it's transmitted to the room. But that's only 50% of the energy. The other 50% of the energy is affecting the air inside the box. So when you have a sealed cabinet, by default it means you are wasting 50% of the output power of the driver. And as I love tube amplifiers, that's like a 0.7 watt per channel tube amplifier, I have learned from experimentation that every tiny bit of more efficiency I can get from a loudspeaker, it will reap me tremendous rewards. And now wasting 50% of it in a closed cabinet, that for me is just like an absolute no, it's a tremendous waste. But when someone has, let's say, a 5000 watt per channel solid state amplifier, you can even waste like 90% of the power. Who cares? That's why the popularity today of extremely low efficiency cabinets, which have an efficiency less than 1%, often less than 0.2%. So basically most of these loudspeakers you can get on the market today commercially, they produce, so if you have dump even like 1000 watts of power in a modern loudspeaker cabinet, then you are getting 990 watts of heat, and only 10 watts of power is transformed to create sound, or even less. This is a really good case scenario. So actually what you are getting is more like on the order of 998 watts of power and 2 watts created to sound pressure. That's much more accurate. That's like a 0.2% efficiency. That's like an 85 dB sensitivity or something like that. Efficiency, sensitivity. Efficiency is the 0.2%. So, but here, in that case, anyway, I don't want to overcomplicate things because I promised that now I'm going to have a look at transmission lines and base reflex. So what happens is that we are happy that we can reproduce higher frequencies with our driver pushing the air out into the room or withdrawing the air, so it's moving back and forth, and it's creating these pressure fluctuations. But there's also pressure fluctuations created on the inside of the pipe. And because it has a really nice length, of course it has a length, or height in this case, that the pressure fluctuation will be going like aligning as like going from highest to lowest. So the air column, as the membrane moves, it will start to move the air column in the speaker up and down, up and down, up and down. And it can make it move like tiny bit, like up and down, like maybe like an inch, or maybe 2 inches, 5 inches, 10 inches, or maybe 6 feet. So if it moves like a few inches movements, then as the column is moving here, the air column, then there's the mouth here, and from the mouth, oops, that's not what I wanted. No, yes, this is what I wanted. So as the pressure fluctuates, it will exit from the mouth of the pipe into the room. And if the pressure fluctuations were tiny, so the movement was really tiny, then it will be like a high frequency signal. And the bigger the air column is made move, then the greater the wavelength will be, which means a lower frequency sound. So while we are here at this driver, I think I just really made this not exactly correct. I think something like this would be much more accurate. And this wavelength is more representative of what we might be seeing coming out from here. And what is the peak that we can get out of here? It corresponds to the pressure fluctuating from room 0 to the highest, to the top. So this pressure fluctuation defines the biggest range that it can affect the pressure. And that's why these pipes have a limitation for the quarter wave. And let's see, I have here a really nice diagram. I think you all, maybe you are doing it, but you have seen guys doing this in the gym with ropes. This is the exact same thing that a transmission line is doing, or a Voigt pipe. That the cabinet itself is like the body of the athlete, or I would say the arms of the athlete. The driver is the muscle moving the arms, and the rope, the coil of rope, is the air that the athlete moves. And imagine the arm as the air column inside the cabinet, and imagine the rope as an extension of his arm, creating those waves. And if he moves his arm only a little bit, then you will see the coils having like really rapid succession, so like the frequency will be higher. And if he moves his arms a lot, then the frequency will be lower. And the lowest frequency a person in the gym can reproduce with these coils is defined by the length of his arms. So like lifting your arms to the highest and lowest, that's how you can make the longest coils in the rope. And that's what's going on inside the Voigt pipe. And that's why the taller your pipe, the higher, the longer the wavelength one can move to create these fluctuations. And going back here, it goes out in the room. And it's quarter wave, because what happens in the pipe is that you see the mouth. is at the exact same pressure as the air in the room. So from here we are trying to change the pressure of the room through the mouth. And if we are using the longest wavelength that this is capable of, then in that scenario, here we have the lowest pressure, or the starting pressure. Like here, if you look at the pressure wave, like a sine wave, like the x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is the pressure change, then in the beginning we are at the same pressure as the room itself. And then the pressure starts increasing. And then it reaches a peak. And then it starts going low, reaches the same level where it was before anything started, where your room normally is. And then it starts to go lower than that, reaches the peak. And then it goes back to zero. And then reaches the peak, goes back to zero, reaches the negative peak, and it continues doing like that. And the quarter length is enough to create this. Why? Because we are going from zero to peak, and that's a quarter wavelength. And then when that exits, then we are going from peak to zero. That's also just a quarter wavelength distance. And then 0 to negative peak is also a quarter distance. So what we need to achieve inside the cabinet is just a quarter, is just the pressure differential for a quarter wave. We don't need anything more. So if you have enough length to achieve a quarter wave pressure differential, you can keep this going, you can keep this rope coiling with maximum efficiency and strength. And what happens with the base reflex? So here, that's why it's important to have a room big enough to sustain it. Because if your room is not big enough to sustain the wavelength, then it's kind of like you are the rope coiler and your rope is too short. So that you won't be able to excite it to have those waves in the room, because it doesn't fit inside your room. So that's why you need room size for low frequencies with Voigt pipes or quarter wave pipes. And now let's look at base reflex. Now we have something totally different going on. We still have the driver. Maybe the driver is facing here, creating your high frequencies, mid frequencies, but the base, what's doing? The backside of the driver is creating the pressure inside the cabinet, and here now it's not a pressure fluctuations like we had here from zero pressure to maximum pressure, but it's a random hot mess. It's the pressure just tries to just bang here back. Everything is like randomly like a ripple carnival. It's just a total hot mess. It's kind of like ants crawling all around. There's no organization whatsoever, which is not ants, because ants are organized. But it's just a random hot mess, and it's a pressurized mess, because compared to the room, it's at much higher pressure. And to release it to the room, we are pressurizing it even further. So imagine that within your cabinet, it's about 1,000 times more pressurized than your room already, or even more. If you have really tiny speakers, that can be even more, the ratio even worse than that. And when it goes through the port, then the pressurization is even higher. So we are adding a factor of about 50 to 100, something like that. So we have air that moves at speeds like 1,000, 10,000 times faster than the air would move in your room to create that sound that you hear. So you have like a tremendous wind speed going there, tremendous pressurization, and the trick with the ports is they are only allow sound frequencies, pressure fluctuations to escape through the port for a 1 octave bandwidth. So depending on the on the size of the port, which is the hole that it opens, and that the tube's diameter basically, and the length of the tube. These two define what will be that octave, what will be that frequency around which an octave worth of pressure can exit, can leave it or come back from the room without opposition. And the further you are from these frequencies, it will be harder and harder for the air to pass through the port. And of course, like even like an octave above and below, or maybe 2 octaves above and below, there's still a little air movement, but it's only a tiny fraction of what is capable to pass at the frequency around which the port is centered. And what happens when this extremely high pressure air squeezes out in your room? It's really like, imagine like you have maybe you have a container, and in this container you have maybe flour, and this is, let's say, maybe like a football full of flour, and this football has a tiny pipe attached to it, and you are squeezing the football, and then the flour shoots at high speed, and then it goes into the room, and it just literally explodes in all directions without any directivity, as it changes from extremely high pressure to low pressure. There's like in the food industry, they have machines called extruders, and that's how like puffed cereals are made. So they undergo this high pressure, and then they arrive in the low pressure air, and then you get your puffed rice, cornflakes, and stuff like that. And the same thing is happening with air. You get this extremely high pressure front moving, and then it hits the low pressure zone in the room, and it just dissipates, the pressure wave dissipates into the low pressure of the room. And the way your room, let's say the blackboard is the room, as you see, like here these arrows are representing that the sound, the pressure exiting the port is just finding the path of least resistance and just evenly spreads out like an explosion. If you have a grenade, you toss it out, the shards fly everywhere. Same thing happening here. It's like a grenade. You have a high pressure explosive going through the port. No, it's not. It's air. But you can imagine as high pressure, highly pressurized substance, and when it receives, it gets out into the air of the room, where the pressure is like 1,000 or 10,000 times lower than the pressure it is carrying, then it's going to just find the path of least resistance and propagate according to it to be the most efficient. And then the only effect that your room has is that the bigger the room, the harder it is to pressurize the room. So basically, ported loudspeakers pressurize the room, so they create pressure in the room, and the smaller your room is, the easier it is to pressurize the room. A bigger room, you need a bigger speaker, bigger motor to pressurize it. So that's really the key to bass reflex speakers, and that's why they don't use the room in a way that that if you have a bigger room with bass reflex, you are going to get weaker bass, and for a smaller room you are going to have more powerful bass. And for transmission lines, the bigger the room, you are going to have more powerful low frequency bass. That's about it. Of course, even with bass reflex, when we are looking at the effect of the room, the size of the room defines which frequencies are supported by your room, which also we call as room nodes, or the effect of your room. Some frequencies based on the size and also the placement of your speakers will be exaggerated, and some frequencies will be clipped or cut, like lowered, like snuffed out, cancelled, based on their position. So as you move around in the room, you have different dips, different clips, and there, depending on the size of the room, there will be certain frequencies which will be emphasized by your room, but that's something normal, and that happens for any kind of speaker, any kind of sound made in that room, and it has nothing to do with the cabinet, or how you do it, or whether it doesn't even have a cabinet, it's a human voice, or is it a fly buzzing around. It will be affected the same way by the room anyway. So thank you for this fantastic question. I hope this little video was helpful for everyone to form an understanding of what's the big difference between bass reflex and transmission line. So thank you. Bye bye.